I still remember the weight of 10,000 pounds in my hands and how it felt lighter than the silence that followed. That night, in the flickering glow of a dying fire, I learned that some tests are not meant to be passed, but to be shattered entirely. My name is Charlotte Wyndham, and before I became the governess of Ashworth Manor, I was someone else. I was the daughter of Viscount Wyndham of Hartley Green, a man whose laughter once filled ballrooms and whose generosity was spoken of from London to the northern counties. I wore silk then. I danced beneath chandeliers that dripped crystal light like frozen rain. I believed, as only the young and sheltered can believe, that such things would last forever. They did not. My father's ruin came not through vice or gambling, as so many assumed, but through trust. He had signed his name as guarantor for a man he called brother, a childhood friend whose investments collapsed like a house of cards in a winter storm. Within 6 months, the creditors had taken everything: the estate, the horses, my mother's jewelry, piece by piece, until even her wedding ring was gone. I watched her weep as she handed it over, and I understood then that love could be stripped away by men in black coats carrying ledgers. My mother did not survive the shame. She called it influenza, but I knew better. She had simply stopped wanting to breathe in a world that had taken everything from her. I held her hand as she passed, her fingers cold and thin, and she whispered to me words I carry still. She said, "Charlotte, never let them see you break. Promise me. You are a Wyndham. That name means something, even when everything else is gone." I promised. My father followed her within the year. His heart, the physician said. But I knew it was grief and guilt, and the weight of watching his wife fade while he could do nothing. He left me with nothing but my name and a letter of reference from a distant cousin who had married well and felt generous enough to acknowledge that I existed. I was 19 years old. I had been taught to embroider, to play the pianoforte, to manage a household, and to speak French with a passable accent. None of these skills, I discovered, mattered when you were penniless and alone. What mattered was whether you could swallow your pride and accept a position beneath the station you were born to. I could. I had to. The letter of reference led me to 3 years as a companion to an elderly widow in Suffolk, a kind woman who treated me gently and died in her sleep on a Tuesday morning in April. Her son arrived for the funeral, glanced at me with the particular dismissal reserved for servants who are not quite servants, and informed me that my services would no longer be required. And so I found myself, at 22 years of age, standing before the iron gates of Ashworth Manor, my single trunk at my feet and the autumn wind pulling at my cloak. The sky was gray, the kind of gray that presses down on you, that makes the world feel smaller and colder than it truly is. I looked up at the manor and felt something tighten in my chest. It was beautiful, in the way that powerful things are beautiful. Imposing. The stone was dark with age, the windows tall and narrow, watching like eyes. Ivy climbed the eastern wall, and the gardens, though dormant for the season, stretched out in careful patterns that spoke of wealth and order and generations of hands that had never known labor. This was old money, old power, the kind that built empires and crushed those who stood in its way. I had been hired to teach the Duke's daughter, Lady Arabella, age 7, motherless since infancy, and, according to the housekeeper's letter, difficult. The word had been underlined twice. I had smiled when I read it. Difficult children, in my experience, were simply children who had been disappointed too many times by the adults around them. I could understand that. I could work with that. What I could not work with, I would soon discover, was the Duke himself. James Cavendish, the Duke of Ravenswood, was not in residence when I arrived. I was received by Mrs. Pemberton, the housekeeper, a tall woman with steel-gray hair and eyes that missed nothing. She showed me to my room, a small but clean chamber on the 3rd floor, and explained the household routines with the efficiency of someone who had repeated them 100 times. Meals in the servants' hall, lessons in the East Wing, Lady Arabella takes her supper at 6 and is in bed by 8. The Duke is rarely home, and when he is, you will address him only if spoken to first. Is that understood?" I said that it was. She paused at the door, studying me with an expression I could not quite read. Then she said, "You are not what I expected." I asked her what she had expected. "Someone older," she said. "Someone who looks less like the portraits in the gallery." I did not understand what she meant. Not then. Lady Arabella was indeed difficult, but not in the way I had anticipated. She was not loud or defiant or prone to tantrums. She was quiet. Too quiet. A small, pale child with dark hair and her father's gray eyes, and she regarded me with the wariness of a creature that has learned not to trust. She answered my questions in monosyllables. She completed her lessons without complaint, but also without interest. She looked at me as though she was waiting for me to leave, as though she had already decided that I would. I did not leave. Day by day, I sat with her. I read to her. I asked her about her favorite things and received silence in return. I told her about my own childhood, about the horses I had loved and the garden where my mother grew roses, and sometimes I saw something flicker in her eyes, a spark of curiosity, a question she did not yet dare to ask. It took 3 weeks before she spoke to me unprompted. We were in the library, the fire crackling low, and she looked up from her primer and said, "Did you have a mother?" I told her that I did once. She nodded, as though this confirmed something she had suspected. Then she said, "I had one too, but she went to heaven before I could remember her." I said that I was sorry. I meant it. She returned to her primer, but that night, when I tucked her into bed, she reached for my hand. She held it for just a moment, her small fingers curling around mine, and then she let go and turned away. It was enough. It was a beginning. The Duke returned in November. I heard the carriage before I saw it, the clatter of wheels on the gravel drive, and I watched from the schoolroom window as he emerged. He was tall. That was my first impression. Tall and broad-shouldered, dressed in black, his coat perfectly tailored, and his posture rigid. He did not look up at the house. He did not pause to greet the servants who hurried out to meet him. He moved like a man who expected the world to arrange itself around him, and it did. I stepped back from the window, my heart beating faster than I wanted to admit. That evening, Mrs. Pemberton summoned me to the drawing room. The Duke wished to meet me. To assess me, I understood, though she did not say so. I smoothed my dress, a plain gray wool that was the best I owned, and descended the stairs with my chin held high. I was a Wyndham. My circumstances had changed, but my spine had not. He was standing by the fireplace when I entered, a glass of brandy in his hand. He did not turn immediately. I stood in the doorway, waiting, and the silence stretched between us like a held breath. Then he turned. I understood, in that moment, what Mrs. Pemberton had meant about the portraits in the gallery. His wife. His late wife. I had seen her likeness on the wall of the upper corridor, a beautiful woman with dark hair and a gentle smile. And I, with my dark hair and my gray-green eyes and the particular shape of my face, bore an unfortunate resemblance to her. The Duke's expression flickered. Something crossed his features, too fast to name, and then it was gone, replaced by the careful blankness of a man who had learned to feel nothing. "So," he said, "you are Miss Wyndham." I curtsied. "I am, Your Grace." He studied me with the same cool assessment one might give a horse at auction. "Wyndham," he repeated, "the daughter of the Viscount who ruined himself for sentiment." I felt the words like a slap, but I did not flinch. "My father trusted the wrong man," I said. "It was not sentiment. It was loyalty, a dangerous distinction," he said. "One often leads to the other." I did not respond. I had learned in my years of service that some men wanted to provoke a reaction. I would not give him the satisfaction. He circled me slowly, his footsteps quiet on the thick carpet. Mrs. Pemberton tells me you have made progress with my daughter. She is a lovely child, I said. Intelligent and perceptive. She is stubborn and silent, he corrected. She has driven away 4 governesses in 2 years. Perhaps, I said carefully, she simply needed someone who would stay. His eyes met mine. Something sharp flickered in their depths. And you intend to stay, do you? I intend to teach her, I said, for as long as you permit me to do so. He set down his brandy glass with a deliberate click. The fire crackled. Outside, the wind had begun to rise, rattling the windows in their frames. I have heard things about you, Miss Wyndham, he said, whispers from London. There are those who say you took this position not out of necessity, but out of calculation. That you see my household as an opportunity. That you hope to secure your future through my daughter, and eventually through me. I felt the blood drain from my face. The accusation was monstrous and untrue. But I knew how these things worked. How easily a woman in my position could be condemned by rumor. How quickly a life could be destroyed by words spoken in drawing rooms and passed from ear to ear until they became accepted truth. I do not know who has said these things, I replied, my voice steady despite the tremor in my hands. But they are lies. I came here to work, nothing more. He watched me for a long moment. Then he smiled, and it was not a kind smile. It was the smile of a man who had stopped believing in kindness long ago. We shall see, he said. You may go. I left the drawing room with my head held high, but once I reached the privacy of my own chamber, I sank onto the edge of my bed and pressed my hands to my face. I was shaking, not with fear, but with something older and more familiar. The same helpless fury I had felt when the creditors came, when my mother died, when the world showed me again and again that those with power could crush those without it, and there was nothing to be done but endure. I would endure this too. The weeks that followed were strange. The Duke was rarely present, but his shadow hung over the household like a cloud. The servants spoke of him in hushed tones. He is grieving still, one of the maids told me. The Duchess died 7 years ago, but he has never recovered. He loved her more than life itself, and now he trusts no one. I wanted to ask why. I wanted to understand what had happened to make a man so cold, so closed, so determined to see treachery in every gesture of kindness. But it was not my place to ask. And so I focused on Arabella, on the small victories we won together. A smile, a laugh, a question asked without hesitation. She was beginning to trust me, and that trust felt like sunlight after a long winter. It was a night in late December when everything changed. A storm had rolled in from the north, fierce and sudden, and the manor groaned under the assault of wind and rain. I had just finished tucking Arabella into bed when Mrs. Pemberton appeared at the door. The Duke requests your presence in the study, she said, immediately. I followed her down the darkened corridors, my heart uneasy. The Duke had barely spoken to me since our first meeting. Why now? Why tonight? The study was warm, lit by a fire that blazed against the cold. The Duke stood by his desk, and on the desk sat a wooden box, its lid open. Even from the doorway, I could see what was inside. Money. Stacks of banknotes. More money than I had seen in my entire life. Come in, he said. Close the door. I obeyed, my pulse quickening. He gestured to the box. Do you know what this is? It appears to be money, Your Grace. 10,000 pounds, he said. Enough to buy a small estate, enough to restore a fallen family to respectability, enough to secure a future. I said nothing. I did not understand why he was showing me this. He picked up the box and walked toward me. His eyes never left my face. There are those who say you want my money, Miss Wyndham, that you would do anything to have it, that you are no different from the fortune hunters who have circled this estate since my wife died. He placed the box in my hands, It was heavier than I expected. "So I am going to give you a chance," he said. "Burn it." I stared at him. "I beg your pardon?" "Burn it," he repeated. "The fire is right there. If the money means nothing to you, prove it. Throw it into the flames. Every note, every pound, and I will believe that you are what you claim to be." The box trembled in my grip. I looked at the fire, at the flames dancing and hungry. I looked at the money, at the impossible sum that could change my life, could give me back everything I had lost. And I looked at him, at the Duke of Ravenswood, at his cold eyes and his bitter mouth, and the challenge written in every line of his face. He expected me to fail. He expected me to refuse, to clutch the money to my chest, to prove every terrible thing he believed about me. Or perhaps he expected me to obey, to throw the money into the fire like a puppet dancing on his strings, desperate to prove my worthiness, willing to destroy a fortune just to satisfy his test. I did neither. I set the box down on his desk. Then I straightened and met his gaze. "No," I said. His expression flickered. Surprise, confusion. I had done something he had not anticipated. "No," he repeated. "No," I said again. "I will not burn your money, Your Grace. Not because I want it, but because this test is beneath us both." He stared at me. The fire crackled. Outside, the storm raged on. I continued, my voice steady now. "You have lost someone you loved. I understand grief. I have lived with it every day since I buried my parents. But grief does not give you the right to torment others, to treat them as guilty until they prove their innocence, to reduce them to choices that exist only to confirm your own bitterness." I stepped closer. I did not look away. "I am not here for your money," I said. "I am here because I needed a position, and your daughter needed someone who would not leave her. That is all. And if you cannot believe that, if you insist on seeing treachery where there is only honesty, then that is your burden to carry, not mine." The silence that followed was absolute. I expected anger. I expected him to dismiss me on the spot, to send me out into the storm with nothing but my trunk and my principles. Instead, something extraordinary happened. His mask cracked. It was just for a moment. A single heartbeat in which I saw beneath the coldness, beneath the cruelty, to the man underneath. A man who was not ruthless, but wounded. Not heartless, but terrified. A man who had built walls so high he no longer knew how to climb out from behind them. Then the mask returned. He turned away, walked to the fire, and stood with his back to me. "Leave me," he said. His voice was rough. I left. But as I walked back to my room through the darkened corridors, as the storm howled outside and the candles flickered in their sconces, I knew that something had shifted. Some invisible wall had cracked, some door had opened, just a fraction, and I did not know whether to be hopeful or afraid. What I did know was this: the Duke of Ravenswood had expected me to break. I had refused, and that, I suspected, had changed everything. The morning after the storm, the world was washed clean and pale, as though the fury of the night had stripped everything down to its bones. I stood at my window and watched the gardeners clear fallen branches from the lawns, their breath visible in the cold air, and I wondered if the Duke would dismiss me before noon. He did not. In fact, he did not speak to me at all. When I descended to the schoolroom, Mrs. Pemberton informed me that His Grace had departed for London at first light. "Business matters," she said, though her tone suggested she knew as little as I did about the true reason for his sudden absence. "He is expected to return in a fortnight." A fortnight. 14 days of reprieve. 14 days to breathe, to teach, to pretend that the confrontation in the study had never happened. But it had happened, and I could not forget it. I threw myself into my work with Arabella. We read together in the library, our chairs pulled close to the fire. We practiced arithmetic with buttons and beads, making a game of it until she laughed despite herself. We bundled into our warmest clothes and walked the frost-covered gardens. naming the dormant plants and imagining what they would look like in spring. She was changing. I could see it in the way she held herself, in the way her silences grew shorter and her smiles came more easily. She asked me questions now, about my childhood, about the books I loved, about whether I had ever been to the sea. I told her I had, once when I was very young. My parents had taken me to Brighton for a summer holiday, and I remembered the vastness of the water, the way it stretched to the horizon and seemed to hold all the mysteries of the world. I told her how I had collected shells and kept them in a box by my bed, how I had listened to them at night and imagined I could hear the ocean whispering secrets. She listened with wide eyes. Then she said, "Will you take me someday? To see the sea?" I hesitated. It was not my place to make such promises. I was her governess, not her mother. I could not guarantee that I would be here next month, let alone next year. But she was looking at me with such hope, such fragile, tentative hope, and I could not bear to disappoint her. "I would like that very much," I said, "if your father permits it." She nodded, satisfied, and slipped her small hand into mine. We walked back to the manor in comfortable silence, and I thought that perhaps this was enough. Perhaps this quiet connection, this slow building of trust, was worth more than any fortune. But even as I thought it, I knew that the Duke's shadow still hung over us. He would return, and when he did, I would have to face whatever consequences awaited me. The fortnight passed more quickly than I expected. I filled my days with lessons and my evenings with books from the manor's extensive library. I avoided the servants' gossip as much as I could, though I sometimes caught fragments of conversation. Whispers about the late Duchess, about the Duke's grief, about the circumstances of her death. "She died in childbirth," one of the older maids told me when I asked, directly and without pretense, what had happened. She was too frail, they said, too delicate, but she wanted to give him an heir so badly. She tried 3 times before Lady Arabella, and each time she lost the babe. When Arabella came, she was too weak. She held the child for 1 hour before she passed. 1 hour. I thought of Arabella, of her quiet watchfulness, of the way she studied people as though trying to memorize them before they disappeared. She had never known her mother. All she had were stories and portraits and the ghost of a woman who had loved her enough to die for her. "And the Duke?" I asked. "He never remarried?" The maid shook her head. "He has not looked at another woman since." "Oh, there have been those who tried. Fortune hunters and ambitious mammas and widows who thought they could warm his cold heart. He sent them all away. He does not want a wife. He wants only to be left alone with his grief." I understood then, in a way I had not before. His cruelty was not born of malice, but of fear. He had loved once, deeply and completely, and that love had destroyed him. He could not risk such devastation again. And so he pushed everyone away, tested everyone, expecting betrayal because betrayal would be easier to bear than hope. It did not excuse his behavior, but it explained it. And that explanation lodged itself in my heart like a splinter, impossible to ignore. The Duke returned on a gray Tuesday afternoon. I heard the carriage from the schoolroom window and felt my stomach tighten. Arabella looked up from her lesson, her face suddenly anxious. "Papa is home," she said. "Yes," I replied, keeping my voice calm. "Shall we finish this chapter before you go to greet him?" She shook her head. She set down her book and walked to the window, pressing her small hands against the cold glass. "He never wants to see me," she said quietly. "He looks at me, and then he looks away." My heart ached for her. I crossed the room and knelt beside her, taking her hands in mine. "Your father loves you," I said. "I believe that with all my heart. But sometimes grief makes it difficult for people to show their love. It builds walls around them. It makes them afraid." She looked at me with her father's gray eyes. Will he always be afraid? I did not know how to answer, so I said the only thing I could. I hope not, sweetheart. I hope one day he finds his way back to you. She nodded slowly. Then, with the resilience that only children possess, she straightened her shoulders and said, "Will you come with me? To see him?" I hesitated. It was not protocol. A governess did not accompany her charge to greet the master of the house. But Arabella was looking at me with such need, such desperate hope for an ally, that I could not refuse. "Of course," I said. We descended the stairs together, her hand in mine. The Duke was in the entrance hall, shrugging off his coat while servants bustled around him. When he saw us on the staircase, he froze. For a long moment, no one moved. His eyes went first to Arabella, and I saw the flicker of pain that crossed his features. Then his gaze shifted to me, and the pain gave way to something else, something I could not name. "Lady Arabella wished to welcome you home, Your Grace," I said, curtsying. "I hope we are not intruding." He did not respond immediately. He stared at our joined hands, at the way Arabella pressed close to my side, and something in his expression shifted. Then he did something I did not expect. He crouched down, bringing himself to Arabella's level, and said, "Did you now?" Arabella nodded, suddenly shy. She did not release my hand, but she did not hide behind me either. "Welcome home, Papa," she whispered. The Duke reached out and touched her cheek, just briefly, with a tenderness that seemed to surprise even him. "Thank you," he said. His voice was rough. "I am glad to be home." Then he rose and walked away without another word, leaving us standing in the entrance hall, with the servants watching and the cold draft swirling around our ankles. But Arabella was smiling. "He touched my face," she said softly, wonderingly. "He never does that." I squeezed her hand. "Perhaps things are changing," I said. I did not know how right I was. The days that followed were strange. The Duke remained at Ashworth Manor, which was unusual in itself. He took his meals in the dining room rather than his study. He walked the grounds in the afternoons, a solitary figure in black against the winter-white landscape. And sometimes, when I looked up from my lessons with Arabella, I would find him standing in the doorway, watching us. He never entered, he never spoke. He simply watched, as though trying to understand something that eluded him. I pretended not to notice. I continued my lessons, my voice steady and calm, my focus entirely on Arabella. But I felt his gaze like a weight, and it unsettled me in ways I could not explain. One evening, after Arabella had gone to bed, Mrs. Pemberton informed me that the Duke wished to see me in the library. My heart lurched, but I kept my composure. I smoothed my dress, pinched color into my cheeks, and made my way down the corridor. The library was one of my favorite rooms in the manor. It stretched the full length of the east wing, its walls lined with books from floor to ceiling, leather and paper and old ink, the scent of centuries of knowledge preserved and treasured. On nights when I could not sleep, I would sometimes steal down here with a candle and lose myself in the pages of novels and histories and poetry. Tonight, the room was lit by a fire and a handful of candles, their light pooling in golden circles on the polished floor. The Duke stood by the window, his back to me, looking out at the darkness beyond. "You wish to see me, Your Grace," I said. He did not turn. "Close the door," he said. I obeyed, my pulse quickening. The silence stretched between us. Then finally he spoke. "I owe you an apology." I blinked. Of all the things I had expected him to say, this was not among them. He turned to face me, and for the first time, I saw something other than coldness in his eyes. Weariness, regret, the hollow look of a man who has spent too many years fighting battles he cannot win. "What I did that night, with the money," he said, "it was unforgivable. You were right. The test was beneath us both." I did not know how to respond. I had imagined this moment in some secret corner of my heart, but I had never truly believed it would come. "I said what I believed," I replied carefully. "I do not regret it." "No," he said, "you would not. You are not a woman who bends, are you, Miss Wyndham? You do not break under pressure. You do not flinch from confrontation. I have had practice, I said quietly. He nodded, as though this confirmed something he had suspected. Yes, I imagine you have. He moved away from the window, pacing slowly along the shelves of books. His fingers trailed across the spines, not really seeing them. I have spent 7 years, he said, building walls, keeping everyone at a distance. I told myself it was wisdom, that I was protecting myself, protecting Arabella, from those who would use us for our position and our fortune. But I see now that I was only protecting my own cowardice. He stopped and looked at me directly. You see my daughter, he said, truly see her. You do not look through her or past her. You look at her as though she matters, and she is changing because of you. She laughs now. She asks questions. She reaches for your hand as though she trusts that you will not let go. I felt tears prick at the corners of my eyes. She is easy to love, I said. She was always worthy of love. She only needed someone to show her. And you, he said, are you also worthy of love, Miss Wyndham? The question struck me like a blow. I did not know how to answer it. I was not certain I had ever been asked. I believe all people are, I said finally, even those who have forgotten how to accept it. He studied me for a long moment. The firelight flickered, casting shadows across his face, and I saw again what I had glimpsed that night of the storm. The man beneath the mask, the heart beneath the ice. Then he said, I will be hosting a Christmas gathering. A small affair. A few families from the county. It is tradition, and I have neglected it for too long. Mrs. Pemberton will need assistance with the preparations. I would like you to help her. It was not a request, but it was also not an order. It was something in between, an invitation wrapped in the language of duty. Of course, Your Grace, I said. I would be honored. He nodded. Then something unexpected crossed his features. It might have been the ghost of a smile. You may go, he said, but Miss Wyndham. I paused at the door. Thank you, he said, for staying, for not letting them drive you away. Them, I thought. The rumors, the whispers, the forces that conspired against anyone who dared to enter this house with honest intentions. I will not be driven away, Your Grace, I said. Not by gossip, not by tests, not by anything. I left the library with my heart beating strangely in my chest. Something had shifted between us. Some barrier had fallen. I did not know what it meant, and I was afraid to examine it too closely. But as I climbed the stairs to my room, I caught sight of my reflection in a darkened window. The woman who looked back at me was different from the one who had arrived at Ashworth Manor 3 months ago. Stronger, more certain, more alive. And despite everything, despite the uncertainty and the danger and the whispers that followed me everywhere, I found myself smiling. The Christmas preparations began in earnest the following week. The manor was transformed. Garlands of evergreen appeared along the banisters, candles multiplied in every window. The kitchens filled with the scent of cinnamon and cloves and roasting meat, and the servants moved with a purpose I had not seen before. Arabella was beside herself with excitement. She had never experienced a proper Christmas gathering, she told me. Her father had always canceled them, always found some excuse to keep the house empty and quiet. But not this year, she said, her eyes shining. This year will be different. You made him different, Miss Wyndham. I know you did. I tried to tell her that I had done nothing, that the change was his own. But she only smiled, as though she knew a secret I did not. The guests began arriving 3 days before Christmas. Carriages rolled up the drive bearing families I did not know, lords and ladies bundled in furs and velvet, their breath clouding in the cold air. I watched from the schoolroom window as the Duke greeted them, his manner formal but not cold. He shook hands, he offered bows, he even on one occasion laughed. Arabella was permitted to join the adults for dinner on Christmas Eve. a rare privilege that sent her into raptures of nervous anticipation. I helped her dress in her finest frock, a deep green velvet with cream-colored lace, and brushed her dark hair until it shone. "You look beautiful," I told her. She studied her reflection in the mirror. "Do I look like her?" she asked softly. "Like my mother?" I hesitated. I had seen the portrait. The resemblance was undeniable. "You have her eyes," I said carefully, "and her grace. But you are also entirely yourself, Arabella. And that is more than enough." She nodded, satisfied, and took my hand as we descended to the dining room. The evening was a blur of candlelight and conversation and music. I sat at the far end of the table, as befitted my station, but I found myself watching the Duke more often than I should have. He was animated in a way I had never seen, engaging his guests with wit and charm, playing the role of the gracious host with apparent ease. But every so often, his eyes would drift to where Arabella sat, and I would see the softness in his gaze, the quiet wonder of a man rediscovering something precious he thought he had lost. After dinner, there was dancing in the ballroom. I did not expect to participate. Governesses did not dance with lords. But I stood in the doorway and watched, mesmerized by the swirl of gowns and the strains of the violin, and I thought of the girl I had once been. The girl who had danced at her own balls, who had worn silk instead of wool, who had believed that happiness was a thing that could be held. Miss Wyndham. I turned. The Duke was standing beside me, so close I could smell the faint scent of his cologne, something warm and woody and unexpectedly comforting. "Your Grace," I said, my voice catching. He extended his hand. "Dance with me," he said. I stared at him. "Your guests will talk." "Let them," he said. "I find I no longer care. I should have refused." Every rule of propriety, every lesson I had learned about knowing my place, demanded that I refuse. But his hand was still extended, and his eyes were not cold. They were warm, uncertain, hopeful. I placed my hand in his. The music seemed to swell around us as he led me onto the floor. I was aware of the whispers, the curious stares, the raised eyebrows of the watching lords and ladies, but they faded to nothing as he placed his other hand on my waist and we began to move. We did not speak. We did not need to. The dance spoke for us, the steps and turns and the careful distance of our bodies that somehow felt closer than any touch. I looked up at him and found him looking back, and in that moment, everything else fell away. I did not know what was happening between us. I did not know what it meant or where it would lead. But I knew with a certainty that frightened me that I was no longer just a governess in his eyes, and he was no longer just my employer in mine. The music ended. We stood facing each other, breathless, our hands still joined. "Thank you," he said softly, "for the dance, and for everything else." Before I could respond, he released me and stepped back. The mask was returning, the walls rebuilding themselves. But they were not as high as before, and through the cracks I could see something that looked almost like hope. I returned to the doorway. I watched him move among his guests, the perfect host once more. But my heart was racing, and my hand, where he had held it, still burned with the memory of his touch. What was happening to me? What was happening to us? I did not have the answers. But as the clock struck midnight and the guests raised their glasses to toast the coming Christmas, I caught his eye across the crowded room. And he smiled. Not the bitter smile of our first meeting, not the mocking smile of the test. A real smile, warm and unguarded and meant only for me. I smiled back, and I knew, in that moment, that nothing would ever be the same. The morning after Christmas, I woke to find the world transformed by snow. It had fallen silently in the night, blanketing the grounds of Ashworth Manor in white, softening every edge and muffling every sound. I stood at my window and watched the pale dawn light spread across the frozen gardens, and I tried to make sense of what had happened. He had danced with me. The Duke of Ravenswood had taken my hand before all his guests and led me onto the ballroom floor. He had held me close, closer than propriety allowed, and he had smiled at me as though I were the only person in the room. I pressed my fingers to the cold glass and felt the chill seep into my skin. I needed to be sensible. I needed to remember who I was and who he was and the impossible distance between us. A governess did not dream of dukes. A fallen woman did not reach for the stars. But my heart would not listen to reason. It kept returning to that dance, to the warmth of his hand on my waist, to the way his eyes had softened when they met mine. Something had changed between us, something I could not name and dared not hope for. The guests departed over the following days, their carriages cutting dark tracks through the pristine snow. I watched them go from the schoolroom window, grateful for the return to normalcy, to the quiet rhythms of lessons and walks and evenings by the fire. Arabella chattered endlessly about the Christmas gathering, about the dresses she had seen and the music she had heard and the way her father had laughed at dinner. He laughed, she kept saying, as though this were the most miraculous thing in the world. He actually laughed. I smiled and nodded and tried not to think about the way he had looked at me across the crowded ballroom, tried not to wonder what it meant, tried not to hope. But hope is a stubborn thing. It grows in the darkest corners, in the spaces between heartbeats, and once it takes root, it cannot be easily destroyed. The Duke remained at Ashworth Manor through the new year. He took his meals with us now, Arabella and I joining him in the small breakfast room rather than eating separately in the schoolroom. It was unconventional. Mrs. Pemberton raised an eyebrow the first time she saw the arrangement, but she said nothing. She was too wise to question her master's choices, and perhaps she saw what I was afraid to see. That something was shifting in this house, that the ice was finally beginning to thaw. Our conversations at breakfast were careful, polite, circling each other like dancers who had not yet learned the steps. We spoke of the weather, of Arabella's progress in her studies, of books we had read and places we had seen. He asked me about my childhood, and I found myself telling him things I had never told anyone. About the garden where my mother grew roses, about the way my father used to read poetry aloud in the evenings, his voice rolling over the words like music. About the day I realized that everything I had known was gone, and the strange, hollow feeling that had lived inside me ever since. He listened without interrupting, and when I finished, he said quietly, "I know that feeling. The hollowness. I have carried it for 7 years." I looked at him across the table, at the strong lines of his face and the shadows beneath his eyes, and I understood that we were more alike than I had ever imagined. Both of us scarred by loss. Both of us afraid to reach for happiness again. But understanding did not make it easier. If anything, it made it harder. Because now I saw him not as the cold, cruel Duke who had tested me with 10,000 pounds, but as a man, a wounded, grieving, deeply human man who had been hurt so badly he had forgotten how to love. And I was beginning to realize, with a terror that kept me awake at night, that I was falling in love with him. It was not supposed to happen. I had come to Ashworth Manor seeking only employment, only stability, only a place to rebuild my shattered life. I had not come seeking love. I had not believed I deserved it. But the heart does not ask permission. It simply feels. And what I felt for James Cavendish, the Duke of Ravenswood, was deeper and more dangerous than anything I had experienced before. I tried to hide it. I maintained my composure, my professional demeanor, my careful distance. But sometimes, when our eyes met across the breakfast table or our hands brushed while passing a book, I saw something flicker in his gaze, a recognition, a shared secret, as though he knew what I was feeling because he was feeling it too. We did not speak of it. We did not acknowledge it. We simply continued our careful dance, circling closer and closer to a truth neither of us was ready to face. And then Lady Blackwood arrived. I first heard her name from Mrs. Pemberton, who mentioned it with a tightness in her voice that immediately put me on alert. "Lady Helena Blackwood," she said, "the Dowager Countess. She has written to say she will be arriving tomorrow for an extended visit." I did not understand the significance at first. "Who is she?" I asked. Mrs. Pemberton's lips pressed into a thin line. She was the late Duchess's mother, Lady Arabella's grandmother. I felt something cold settle in my stomach. In all my months at Ashworth Manor, no one had mentioned a grandmother. No one had spoken of family on the Duchess's side at all. I had assumed they were either dead or estranged. "The Duke knows she is coming?" I asked. "He does," Mrs. Pemberton said. "He is not pleased, but she has rights. She is the child's grandmother. He cannot refuse her." I wanted to ask more, to understand what I was about to face, but Mrs. Pemberton was already moving on to discuss the preparations for Lady Blackwood's arrival, extra rooms to be aired, additional staff to be hired, menus to be approved. I returned to the schoolroom with a sense of foreboding I could not shake. Lady Helena Blackwood arrived the following afternoon in a carriage so grand it seemed to swallow the drive. I watched from the window as she emerged, a tall woman in black silk and ermine, her silver hair swept up beneath an elaborate hat. Even from a distance, I could see the rigidity of her posture, the lift of her chin. This was a woman who expected the world to bend to her will. The Duke met her at the door. I could not hear their words, but I could see their bodies, the tension between them. They did not embrace, they barely touched. He offered a formal bow. She offered a colder nod. Then they disappeared inside, and I turned away from the window with a heaviness in my chest. That evening, I was summoned to the drawing room. Lady Blackwood was seated by the fire, her black skirt spread around her like the wings of a raven. The Duke stood by the window, his face carefully blank. Arabella was not present. I had been instructed to come alone. "So," Lady Blackwood said, her eyes sweeping over me with undisguised assessment, "you are the governess." I curtsied. "I am, my lady, Charlotte Wyndham." "Wyndham," she repeated, her tone sharp. "The disgraced Viscount's daughter." I felt the blood rise to my cheeks, but I kept my voice steady. My father was a good man who trusted the wrong person. His disgrace was not of his own making. Lady Blackwood's eyes narrowed. How very loyal, and how very convenient that his misfortune should land you here, in one of the wealthiest households in England. She did not bother to disguise her meaning. I understood with sickening clarity why she had come. The rumors had reached her. The whispers about the fortune-hunting governess who had set her sights on the grieving Duke, and she had come to put a stop to it. I glanced at the Duke, hoping for some sign of support, but his face remained impassive. He was watching us, watching me, but he did not intervene. "I understand your concerns, my lady," I said carefully, "but I assure you, my only interest is in Lady Arabella's education and well-being. I have no designs on his grace or his fortune." Lady Blackwood smiled, and it was not a kind smile. "Of course you would say that. What else would you say? But I have seen your type before, Miss Wyndham. Pretty, desperate, willing to do whatever it takes to claw your way back to respectability. You think I do not know what you are?" The words stung like a slap. I wanted to defend myself, to protest, but I knew it would do no good. Lady Blackwood had already made up her mind. Nothing I said would change it. "If I may," the Duke said quietly, stepping away from the window, "Miss Wyndham has been an exemplary governess. Arabella has flourished under her care. I have no complaints about her conduct." Lady Blackwood turned her sharp gaze on him. "No complaints? Is that what we are calling it now? The servants talk, Ravenswood. They say you danced with her at Christmas, in front of everyone, a governess, a nobody. Do you have any idea what people are saying?" "I do not care what people are saying," the Duke replied, and there was an edge to his voice now. "A warning." "Then you are a fool," Lady Blackwood snapped. "You forget yourself. You forget what you owe to this family, to your daughter, to the memory of my daughter. Helena gave her life for you. She gave everything. And this is how you repay her? By making eyes at the help? I flinched. I could not help it. The cruelty of her words, the casual dismissal of everything I was, everything I had endured, it cut deeper than I wanted to admit. The Duke's jaw tightened. "That is enough," he said. "It is not nearly enough," Lady Blackwood replied. "She will leave. Tonight. Or I will make certain that every door in England is closed to her. I still have influence, Ravenswood. Do not test me." The silence that followed was absolute. I could hear my own heartbeat, loud and unsteady in my ears. I could feel the weight of their eyes on me, the Duke and his mother-in-law, locked in a battle I did not fully understand. Then the Duke spoke, and his voice was ice. "Miss Wyndham is not going anywhere," he said. "She is employed by me in my household, and she will remain as long as she wishes. If you cannot accept that, then perhaps it is you who should leave." Lady Blackwood's face went white with fury. "You would choose her over your own family?" "I would choose decency over cruelty," he replied. "Something you seem to have forgotten." For a long moment, they stared at each other. Then Lady Blackwood rose, her movements stiff with rage. "You will regret this," she said. "Both of you." She swept from the room without another word, her black skirts hissing against the floor like serpents. I stood frozen, trembling, unable to process what had just happened. The Duke crossed the room to my side. "Are you all right?" he asked softly. "I do not know," I admitted. My voice was shaking. "I did not mean to cause trouble. I never wanted this." "You have caused nothing," he said. "She came here looking for someone to blame. You were simply the nearest target. But the things she said," I began. "Were lies," he interrupted. "Born of grief and bitterness and the need to control something she cannot accept. Helena died 7 years ago. Her mother has never forgiven me for surviving when her daughter did not, and she has never forgiven Arabella for being the child who lived while Helena did not." I stared at him. "She blames Arabella?" He nodded, and for the first time, I saw the full weight of his burden. The guilt he carried. The impossible position of loving a child whose very existence reminded everyone of what had been lost. "That is why I have kept her away," he said. "That is why Arabella has never known her grandmother, because Lady Blackwood looks at her and sees only death." I felt tears prick at my eyes. "That poor child," I whispered. "That poor, sweet child." He reached out and took my hand. His fingers were warm and strong, and they steadied me in a way I had not expected. "You have given her something I could not," he said. "You have shown her that she is worthy of love, that she is not a reminder of tragedy, but a gift, and I will never be able to repay you for that." I looked up at him, at the man I had feared and resented and slowly, impossibly, come to love, and I saw that he was looking at me the same way, with wonder, with gratitude, with something deeper and more dangerous. "James," I whispered, and the use of his Christian name felt like crossing a threshold. He did not correct me. He simply lifted my hand to his lips and pressed a kiss to my knuckles, gentle and reverent. "Charlotte," he said, and my name on his lips sounded like a prayer. We stood like that for a long moment, suspended in the firelight, the world outside forgotten. Then footsteps sounded in the corridor and we stepped apart, the spell broken. But something had been acknowledged between us, something that could not be unspoken. Lady Blackwood remained at Ashworth Manor for 3 more days. She did not speak to me again. She barely acknowledged my existence. But I felt her watching, always watching, her cold eyes following me wherever I went. She spent her time with Arabella, and I was not permitted to intervene. Mrs. Pemberton told me it was the Duke's decision, that he wanted to give Lady Blackwood the opportunity to know her granddaughter, to prove herself capable of love. But when Arabella returned from those visits, she was different, quieter. The light that had been growing in her eyes seemed dimmer, as though someone had blown out a candle. On the second day, I found her crying in the garden. I ran to her, gathering her into my arms, my heart breaking at the sight of her tears. "What happened?" I asked. "What did she say to you?" "She said I killed my mother," Arabella whispered. "She said if I had never been born, Mama would still be alive. She said I am the reason Papa is so sad." I held her tighter, fighting back my own tears. "That is not true," I said fiercely. "None of that is true. Your mother loved you. She wanted you. She would have given anything for you, and she did. But that is not your fault, Arabella. It is not anyone's fault. It is simply the way life sometimes happens." She clung to me, her small body shaking with sobs. "Miss Wyndham," she said. "Charlotte, please do not leave me. Please do not let her send you away. I will never leave you, I promised. Never. I meant it." In that moment, holding that broken child in my arms, I knew I would fight anyone, risk anything, endure anything to protect her. She was not my daughter by blood, but she was mine in every way that mattered. And I would not let Lady Blackwood or anyone else destroy what we had built together. That night, I went to the Duke. I found him in the library, standing by the fire, a glass of brandy in his hand. He looked up when I entered, and I saw the weariness in his face, the strain of these impossible days. "She told Arabella she killed her mother," I said without preamble. "She told her that Helena's death was her fault." The glass in his hand trembled. "What?" I told him everything, the tears, the accusations, the devastation in that little girl's eyes. When I finished, he set down his brandy and walked past me without a word. I heard his footsteps on the stairs, heard his voice, raised and furious, heard Lady Blackwood's shrill protestations. And then I heard the front door open and close. An hour later, Mrs. Pemberton told me that Lady Blackwood had departed for London. She would not be returning. I sank into a chair, relief flooding through me. But the relief was tinged with fear, because I knew this was not over. Lady Blackwood had promised consequences, and women like her did not make idle threats. The Duke found me later that evening. He looked exhausted, drained, but there was a new resolve in his eyes. "I should have done that years ago," he said. "I should have protected Arabella from her from the beginning. But I was afraid of what people would say, afraid of cutting the last tie to Helena." "And now?" I asked. "Now I understand that some ties are not worth keeping," he said. "Some people do not deserve our loyalty, no matter what claims they hold on our past." He sat down across from me, and for a long moment neither of us spoke. The fire crackled, the clock ticked, and between us something unspoken hummed like a plucked string. "Charlotte," he said finally, "there are things I need to tell you, things about Helena, about our marriage, about why I have been the way I have been." I waited, my heart in my throat. He took a breath, and then he began to speak, and what he told me changed everything I thought I knew. The fire had burned low by the time he finished speaking, and the shadows in the library had grown long and deep. I sat perfectly still, my hands folded in my lap, my heart aching with the weight of everything he had told me. "Helena and I were not a love match," he had said, his voice quiet and rough. "Our marriage was arranged by our families when we were barely more than children. She was beautiful, kind, everything a duchess should be, and I cared for her deeply, but I did not love her, not the way she deserved to be loved, not the way she loved me." He had paused then, staring into the dying flames. "She knew," he continued. "She always knew. She never reproached me for it, never complained, but I saw it in her eyes, the longing for something I could not give her. And when she died, when she gave her life trying to give me the heir she thought I wanted, I felt not only grief but guilt. Crushing, unbearable guilt, because I had failed her. I had taken everything she offered and given so little in return. I understood then why he had built his walls so high. It was not only grief that haunted him, but shame. The shame of a man who believed he had not loved enough, who blamed himself for a death that was no one's fault. "You did not kill her," I said softly. "You did not force her to bear children. She made her own choices." "Did she?" he asked, and his voice was bitter. "Or did she make the only choices available to her? A woman in her position, married to a duke, expected to produce an heir. What choice did she truly have?" I did not have an answer. He was right, in a way. The world we lived in gave women precious few choices. We were bound by duty, by expectation, by the relentless machinery of society that cared nothing for our hearts. But I also knew that guilt, left unchecked, could become a prison. And James had been locked in that prison for 7 years. "You cannot carry this forever," I said. "Helena would not want you to. She loved you. She would want you to be happy." He looked at me then, and his eyes were dark with something I could not name. Would she? Or would she hate me for finding happiness with another woman when I could not find it with her? The question hung between us, heavy and dangerous. I knew what he was asking. I knew what he was admitting. And I knew that my answer would change everything. "I think," I said carefully, "that love is not a finite thing. It does not diminish when it is shared. Helena loved you, and she would want you to be loved in return. Not as a betrayal of her memory, but as a continuation of the love she could not stay to give you." He rose from his chair and crossed the room to where I sat. He knelt before me, taking my hands in his, and I saw tears glistening in his eyes. "Charlotte," he said, "I have tried to fight this. I have told myself 1,000 times that it is impossible, that you deserve better, that I have nothing to offer but a broken heart and a tarnished name. But I cannot fight it any longer." He lifted my hands to his lips, pressing a kiss to each palm. "I love you," he said. "I love you in a way I did not know I was capable of loving. You have brought light into this house, into my daughter's life, into my own wretched existence, and I do not know what I would do if I lost you." I felt the tears spill down my cheeks, warm and unbidden. I had not allowed myself to hope for this. I had not believed it possible. And yet here he was, this proud, wounded man, kneeling at my feet and offering me his heart. "James," I whispered, "I love you too. I have loved you for longer than I dared admit, even to myself." He rose and drew me to my feet, and then his arms were around me, holding me close, and I felt the rapid beat of his heart against my own. We stood like that for a long moment, wrapped in each other, the fire crackling low and the night pressing in around us. Then he tilted my chin up and kissed me. It was not a gentle kiss. It was desperate, hungry, the kiss of a man who had been starving for years and had finally found sustenance. I kissed him back with equal fervor, my fingers tangling in his hair, my body pressed against his, and all the careful distance I had maintained crumbled to dust. When we finally broke apart, we were both breathless. "This is madness," he said, but he was smiling, the first real smile I had ever seen on his face. "Society will never accept it. A duke and a governess. They will say I have lost my mind." "Let them say it," I replied. "I have spent my whole life caring what others think. I am tired of it. I want to live for myself, for us." He laughed, a sound so unexpected and so beautiful that it brought fresh tears to my eyes. "Then we shall be mad together," he said. "You and I and Arabella. Our own little family, the world be damned." I laughed with him, giddy with joy and terror and the wild, reckless hope that bloomed in my chest. For the first time in years, I believed that happiness was possible, that I was not destined for a life of quiet endurance, but for something more, something extraordinary. But even as I surrendered to that hope, a small voice in the back of my mind whispered a warning. Lady Blackwood had made promises, and the world we lived in did not forgive those who defied its rules. Happiness, I knew, would have to be fought for. I was ready to fight. The weeks that followed were the happiest of my life. James and I did not announce our understanding publicly, not yet, But within the walls of Ashworth Manor, everything changed. We took our meals together as a family, Arabella delighting in the newfound warmth between her father and her governess. We walked the grounds together, James's hand finding mine when the servants were not watching. We read aloud in the library, Arabella curled between us, and for the first time the great house felt like a home. Arabella bloomed. The shadow of Lady Blackwood's visit lingered, but it faded more each day as love and laughter filled the spaces where fear had lived. She called me Charlotte now, not Miss Wyndham, and sometimes, in unguarded moments, she slipped and called me Mama. I did not correct her. I held those moments close to my heart like precious jewels. James began the process of petitioning for permission to marry. It was complicated, he explained. A duke could not simply wed whomever he chose. There were legalities, formalities, expectations to be navigated. But he was determined, and I believed in his determination. I should have known it could not last. The first sign of trouble came in the form of a letter. It arrived on a grey morning in late February, delivered by a messenger in the livery of a London solicitor. James read it in his study, and when he emerged, his face was pale. "What is it?" I asked, fear coiling in my stomach. He handed me the letter without a word. I read it twice before I understood. Lady Blackwood had filed a petition with the Court of Chancery. She was seeking custody of Arabella. The grounds, the letter stated, were moral unfitness. The Duke of Ravenswood, it alleged, had taken up with a woman of low character, a disgraced fortune hunter, who had insinuated herself into his household through deception and manipulation. The child's welfare was at risk. The child's reputation was at stake. The grandmother, as the nearest respectable female relative, was the appropriate guardian. The letter trembled in my hands. "This cannot be legal," I said. "She cannot simply take a child from her father." "She can try," James said grimly, "and she has powerful friends. Her late husband was a viscount. Her family has connections to half the peerage. If she convinces the court that I am unfit, that you are a corrupting influence, they could grant her petition." I felt the ground shifting beneath my feet. Everything we had built, everything we had hoped for, threatened by the vindictive spite of a woman who could not accept that her daughter was gone. "What do we do?" I asked. "We fight," he said. "But Charlotte, there is something you must understand. If we fight this openly, if we acknowledge our relationship, it will become public. Your name will be dragged through every drawing room in England. The scandal could follow you forever." I looked at him, at the man I loved, and I saw the fear in his eyes. Not fear for himself, but for me. He was offering me an escape, a chance to walk away before the storm hit, to preserve whatever was left of my reputation. And I understood, in that moment, the true depth of his love. "I will not leave you," I said. "I will not abandon Arabella to that woman. If there is a fight to be had, I will stand beside you." He crossed the room and took me in his arms. "You are remarkable," he said against my hair. "Do you know that? The most remarkable woman I have ever known." "I am stubborn," I corrected him. "There is a difference." He laughed, but the laughter was hollow. We both knew what was coming. We both knew it would be the battle of our lives. The following weeks were a blur of solicitors and documents and endless, exhausting meetings. James retained the finest lawyers in London, men with grave faces and measured words who spoke of precedents and procedures and the weight of evidence. I was interviewed, questioned, asked to account for every moment of my time at Ashworth Manor. They wanted to know about my family, my history, my relationship with the Duke. They wanted to know if I had ever been alone with him, if I had ever behaved inappropriately, if I had ever given any indication that my interest was mercenary. I answered honestly. I had nothing to hide. But honesty, I learned, was not always enough. Lady Blackwood had been busy. She had found servants who had left Ashworth Manor, former employees with grudges or grievances, and she had paid them to testify against me. They spoke of whispered conversations and meaningful glances. Of the Christmas ball where the Duke had danced with me. Of the way Arabella clung to me, as though I were her mother. None of it was damning on its own. But taken together, woven into a narrative of seduction and manipulation, it painted a picture that was difficult to refute. The hearing was set for April. I tried to remain strong. I tried to focus on Arabella, on her lessons, on the fragile normalcy we had carved out amidst the chaos. But the strain was beginning to show. I slept poorly. I ate less. I caught myself staring out windows, watching the road as though expecting Lady Blackwood herself to appear and snatch Arabella from my arms. James saw it. Of course he did. He knew me too well by now. One evening, he found me in the library, a book open on my lap, but my eyes fixed on nothing. He sat beside me and took my hand. "We will win this," he said. "I promise you." "You cannot promise that," I replied. "No one can." "Then let me promise something else," he said. "Whatever happens, whatever the court decides, I will not let them take you from me. If we must leave England, we will leave. If we must start again somewhere else, we will start again. But I will not lose you, Charlotte. Not now. Not ever." I turned to face him, and I saw the fierce determination in his eyes. This man, this proud and powerful man, was willing to give up everything for me. His title, his estate, his place in society. He would burn it all down if it meant we could be together. "I do not deserve you," I whispered. He cupped my face in his hands. "You deserve far more than I can give," he said, "but I will spend the rest of my life trying." He kissed me then, soft and tender, and I let myself believe, just for a moment, that everything would be all right. The night before we were to leave for London, Arabella came to my room. She was supposed to be asleep. The journey would be long, and she needed her rest. But when I heard the soft knock on my door, I knew it was her. "I cannot sleep," she said when I opened the door. "I keep thinking about the bad lady, about what she said." I gathered her into my arms and carried her to the chair by the fire. She curled against me, small and warm, and I stroked her hair the way my mother used to stroke mine. "Tell me," I said. "She said I do not deserve to be happy," Arabella whispered. "She said my father is making a mistake by loving you. She said people like us do not get to be happy." I felt rage flare in my chest, hot and fierce. That woman had poisoned this child, had planted seeds of doubt and shame that might take years to uproot. And for what? For pride? For control? For the petty satisfaction of making others suffer? "Listen to me," I said, tilting Arabella's chin up so she could see my eyes. "Your grandmother is wrong. She is bitter and sad, and she wants everyone else to be bitter and sad too. But that is not the truth. The truth is that you deserve all the happiness in the world. Your father loves you. I love you. And nothing anyone says can change that." "But what if the court takes me away?" she asked, and her voice was so small, so frightened, that my heart shattered. "They will not," I said fiercely. "I will not let them. Your father will not let them. We are a family now, Arabella. And families protect each other." She nodded slowly. Then she said something that broke me and healed me all at once. "I love you, Charlotte," she said. "I love you like you were my real mama." I held her tighter, tears streaming down my face. "And I love you," I said, "like you were my real daughter, because you are. In every way that matters, you are." We sat like that until she fell asleep in my arms. Then I carried her back to her room and tucked her into bed, pressing a kiss to her forehead. Tomorrow, we would go to London. Tomorrow, we would face Lady Blackwood and the court and everyone who wanted to tear us apart. But tonight, we were together, and that was enough. The morning dawned cold and clear. The carriage was loaded, the servants assembled to see us off. James helped me inside, then lifted Arabella up beside me. She clutched her favorite doll, a gift I had given her for Christmas, and her eyes were wide but determined. "Ready?" James asked. "Ready," I said. The carriage lurched forward, and Ashworth Manor receded behind us. I watched it grow smaller through the window, this place that had become my home, and I made a silent vow. I would return. We would all return. And when we did, it would be as a family, free from the shadows of the past. I did not know then how hard that promise would be to keep. I did not know what awaited us in London, the revelations and betrayals and the single, devastating moment that would bring everything crashing down. But I knew one thing with absolute certainty. I would fight for this family with everything I had, and I would not, could not, would not lose. London in April was a city of contrasts, of pale sunlight struggling through coal smoke, of grand townhouses standing shoulder to shoulder with crumbling tenements. Our carriage wound through streets I had once known intimately, past squares where I had danced and promenaded in another life, and I felt the weight of memory pressing down on me like a physical thing. We stayed at James's townhouse in Mayfair, a narrow but elegant building that had stood empty for years. The servants had aired the rooms and lit fires in every grate, but there was a coldness to the place that no amount of warmth could dispel. This was not home. This was a battlefield. The hearing was scheduled for the following week. In the days leading up to it, our solicitors came and went in an endless parade of grave faces and hushed consultations. I was not permitted to attend these meetings. It was not appropriate, they said. My presence would only complicate matters. I understood what they meant. A woman in my position had no voice in a court of law. I could not speak for myself, could not defend my own character. I could only wait and hope that the men who held my fate in their hands would see the truth. It was the hardest thing I had ever done. Arabella felt the tension, though we tried to shield her from it. She grew quiet again, retreating into herself the way she had when I first arrived at Ashworth Manor. I read to her in the evenings, held her when she woke from nightmares, promised her over and over that everything would be all right. But I saw the doubt in her eyes. She had been disappointed too many times to believe in promises. The night before the hearing, James came to my room. It was improper, scandalous even. If anyone had seen him enter, it would have confirmed every accusation Lady Blackwood had made. But I did not care. I needed him, and he needed me. He stood in the doorway, his face drawn and pale. "I cannot sleep," he said. "Neither can I replied. He crossed the room and took me in his arms, and we stood like that for a long moment, drawing strength from each other. I pressed my face against his chest and listened to the steady beat of his heart, and I tried to memorize the feeling, the warmth of him, the scent of him, the solid, reassuring presence that had become my anchor in the storm. "Whatever happens tomorrow," he said, "I want you to know that I do not regret a single moment. Meeting you, loving you, choosing you. If I had to do it all again, I would not change a thing." I looked up at him, at the man who had transformed from a cold, distant stranger into the love of my life. "I would not change it either," I said. "Not one moment." He kissed me then, soft and slow, a kiss that held all the words we could not say. Then he released me and stepped back. "Try to rest," he said. "Tomorrow will be difficult." "I know," I said, "but we will face it together." He nodded. Then he was gone, and I was alone with the silence and the shadows and the fear that coiled in my stomach like a living thing. I did not sleep that night. I sat by the window and watched the city slowly wake, the lamplighters extinguishing the gas lamps one by one, the first gray light of dawn creeping over the rooftops. And I thought about everything that had brought me to this moment: the loss of my parents, the years of quiet endurance, the arrival at Ashworth Manor, the test with the money, the slow, impossible blooming of love in a place where I had expected only duty. I had been tested before. Life had tested me in ways I never could have imagined. And I had survived. I had endured. I had refused to break. I would not break now. The Court of Chancery was a solemn, imposing building, all dark wood and high ceilings and the musty smell of old paper and older laws. I sat in the gallery with Mrs. Pemberton, who had insisted on accompanying us to London, while James and his solicitors took their places at the front of the courtroom. Lady Blackwood was already there. She sat on the opposite side, dressed in unrelieved black, her face a mask of righteous indignation. When she saw me in the gallery, her lips curled into a smile that made my blood run cold. She believed she had won. She believed that today would be her triumph. I lifted my chin and met her gaze without flinching. The proceedings began with a recitation of the petition. Lady Blackwood's solicitor spoke at length about the Duke's moral failings, about the corrupting influence of the governess, about the sacred duty of the court to protect innocent children from environments of vice and impropriety. He painted a picture of depravity that bore no resemblance to the truth, but he painted it with such conviction that I saw the judges nodding along, their faces grave. Then James's solicitor rose to speak. He was a small man, unassuming, with spectacles perched on his nose and a voice that seemed too soft for such a grand room. But as he began to speak, I understood why James had chosen him. He did not argue, he did not bluster, he simply told the truth. He spoke of Arabella's transformation under my care, of the 4 governesses who had fled before me, unable to reach a child who had been wounded by neglect and grief, of the laughter that now filled the halls of Ashworth Manor, the smiles that had replaced the silences. He produced letters from servants, from the local vicar, from families who had attended the Christmas gathering, all attesting to the Duke's devotion to his daughter and the positive influence I had brought to the household. And then he produced something I had not expected, a letter, written in a delicate, feminine hand. It was, he explained, a letter from the late Duchess Helena, found among her personal effects, never sent, addressed to her husband. I saw James stiffen in his seat. I saw Lady Blackwood's face go pale. And I leaned forward, my heart pounding, as the solicitor began to read. "My dearest James," the letter began, "if you are reading this, then I am gone, and you are alone with our child. I know you blame yourself. I know you believe that you failed me, that your love was not enough. But I need you to understand something. I have always known that ours was not a grand passion. I have always known that your heart was not fully mine, and I have made my peace with it." The solicitor's voice was steady, but I saw tears glistening in James's eyes. "What we had was real," the letter continued. "It was not the love of poets and fairy tales, but it was true and it was good. You gave me respect, you gave me kindness, you gave me a child, and if I could have stayed, I would have spent the rest of my life grateful for those gifts. But I could not stay, and so I ask you this. Do not let my death become your prison. Do not close yourself off from the world in my name. Find someone who makes you laugh. Find someone who brings light into the darkness. Find someone who can love our daughter the way she deserves to be loved." The courtroom was silent. Even Lady Blackwood had gone still, her face ashen. "I do not know what form that love will take," the letter concluded, "but I know this. You deserve happiness, James. You deserve to be loved. And whoever she is, the woman who finally reaches your heart, I hope you will welcome her without guilt. Because that is what I want for you. That is all I have ever wanted. Yours in this life and whatever comes after, Helena." The silence stretched on for a long moment. Then Lady Blackwood rose to her feet. "This is a forgery," she said, her voice shrill. "My daughter would never have written such a thing. She loved him. She loved him more than anything. She would never have given him permission to replace her." The judge looked at her coolly. "The letter has been authenticated by 3 separate handwriting experts," he said. "It is genuine." Lady Blackwood's face crumpled. For the first time, I saw the grief beneath her cruelty, the desperate need to hold on to her daughter's memory even as she destroyed everything her daughter had loved. "Helena is gone," the judge continued, "and her wishes are clear. She wanted her husband to find happiness. She wanted her daughter to be loved. This court sees no evidence that those wishes are not being fulfilled." He turned to Lady Blackwood, and his voice softened slightly. "I understand your grief, my lady. I understand your desire to protect your grandchild. But protection does not mean possession, and love does not mean control. The Duke of Ravenswood is a fit and devoted father. Miss Wyndham, whatever her origins, has proven herself a positive influence in the child's life. This petition is denied, the gavel fell, and just like that, it was over. I sat frozen in my seat, unable to process what had happened. Around me, there was movement, voices, the rustling of papers and the shuffling of feet. But I could not move. I could only stare at James as he rose from his seat and turned to find me in the gallery. Our eyes met. And then he smiled, that rare, beautiful smile that transformed his entire face. I was on my feet before I knew it, pushing through the crowd, running to him in a way that was entirely improper and completely unstoppable. He caught me in his arms and lifted me off my feet, and I buried my face in his neck and wept. "We won," he said against my hair. "Charlotte, we won." I could not speak. I could only hold him, trembling with relief and joy and the overwhelming realization that the nightmare was finally over. When I finally pulled back, I saw that we had an audience. Half the courtroom was watching us, some with disapproval, some with curiosity, and a few with something that looked almost like admiration. I did not care. Let them watch. Let them talk. Let them say whatever they pleased. I had won. We had won. And nothing else mattered. Lady Blackwood left London that evening. I learned later that she had retreated to her estate in the north, that she had closed her doors to visitors and refused all correspondence. I felt a pang of something that might have been pity. She had lost her daughter, and now she had lost her granddaughter too. Not to death or distance, but to her own bitterness, to her inability to let go. I hoped in time she might find peace, but I knew it was not my forgiveness to give or my wound to heal. Some battles are not ours to fight. We returned to Ashworth Manor a week later, the three of us together in the carriage, Arabella chattering excitedly about all the things she wanted to show me in the spring gardens. The countryside unfurled around us, green and gold and alive with the promise of new beginnings, and I watched it pass with a heart so full I thought it might burst. James held my hand the entire journey. He did not speak much, but he did not need to. His presence was enough. His love was enough. When the manor came into view, Arabella pressed her face to the window and cried out with delight. "We are home," she said. "We are finally home." "Yes," I said, squeezing her hand. "We are." The servants lined up to greet us, Mrs. Pemberton at their head with tears in her eyes. "Welcome home, Your Grace," she said to James, "and welcome home, Miss Wyndham." "Actually," James said, and there was a lightness in his voice I had never heard before, "it is no longer Miss Wyndham." I looked at him in confusion. "What do you mean?" He reached into his pocket and withdrew a small velvet box. Then, in front of all the servants, in front of Arabella, in front of the whole world, he sank to one knee. "Charlotte Wyndham," he said, "you have given me back my daughter. You have given me back my heart. You have given me back my life. And I am asking you, here and now, to give me the honor of becoming my wife." I stared at him, at the ring glinting in the afternoon light, at the hope and love shining in his eyes. And I thought of everything we had endured to reach this moment. The tests, the accusations, the court battle, the long, dark nights of doubt and fear. It had all been worth it. Every moment, every struggle, every tear. "Yes," I said, and my voice broke on the word. "Yes, James, 1,000 times yes." He slipped the ring onto my finger, a sapphire surrounded by diamonds, and then he rose and kissed me while the servants cheered and Arabella danced around us in circles. "I am going to have a mama," she shouted, "a real mama, forever and ever, I promised her. And I meant it. We were married in June in the small chapel on the estate where generations of Cavendishes had exchanged their vows. I wore white silk and carried roses from the garden, the same garden where my mother had taught me to love flowers, and I walked down the aisle on the arm of the vicar since I had no father to give me away. But I did not feel alone. I felt surrounded by love. By James, waiting at the altar with tears in his eyes. By Arabella standing beside him, clutching a basket of petals. By the servants and tenants who had come to witness the impossible, a fallen woman rising again. The ceremony was brief and beautiful. We spoke our vows in voices that trembled with emotion. We exchanged rings and promises, and the tentative, terrifying hope of a future built on love instead of duty. And when the vicar pronounced us husband and wife, when James kissed me in front of everyone we knew, I felt something shift inside me. A weight I had carried for so long finally lifted. A door that had been closed for years finally opened. I was Charlotte Cavendish now, the Duchess of Ravenswood. A title I had never sought and never expected, but one I would carry with pride. Not because it made me powerful or wealthy or respectable, but because it meant I belonged. To James, to Arabella, to this family we had built from the ashes of our separate griefs. That evening, after the celebration had ended and the guests had departed, I stood at the window of our chamber and looked out at the gardens below. The roses were in bloom, red and white and pink, their scent drifting up through the open window. The moon was rising over the hills, casting silver light across the lawns. James came to stand beside me. His arm slipped around my waist, and I leaned into him, fitting against his body as though I had been made for this purpose. "Are you happy?" he asked. I turned to face him, to look into the eyes of the man who had changed everything, the man who had tested me with 10,000 pounds and been undone by my refusal to bend. The man who had built walls around his heart and let me tear them down. "I am happy," I said, happier than I ever believed possible. He smiled, that rare and precious smile. "Good," he said, "because I intend to spend the rest of my life making sure you stay that way." He kissed me then, soft and slow, and I surrendered to the moment, to the warmth of his arms, to the promise of tomorrow, to the extraordinary, improbable, miraculous truth of our love. I had come to Ashworth Manor with nothing but my name and my pride. I had expected only hardship, only endurance, only the quiet dignity of survival. I had found so much more. I had found a daughter who called me Mama, a husband who looked at me as though I were the answer to every question he had ever asked, a home where laughter echoed through halls that had known only silence. And I had found myself, the woman I was meant to be, strong and resilient and unafraid. A woman who had been tested by fire and emerged not broken, but forged. The money had not mattered. It had never mattered. What mattered was the truth I had spoken that night in the Duke's study, the truth that had cracked his armor and opened his heart. Some things cannot be bought. Some things can only be earned. And love, true love, is the most precious of them all. I did not burn the 10,000 pounds, but I built something far more valuable from the ashes of that test. I built a life. I built a family. I built a love that would last forever, and that, in the end, was worth more than all the gold in England.